Hello everyone. So we're continuing with the topic of Rav Kook and the imagination. I will try to put the text in the description down below. So this is a very difficult paragraph, and I hope I will do it some justice. Rav Kook begins by saying that the imagination, of course, had to take a back seat at the beginning of our history because there had to be Torah in the world. There had to be that light of truth and goodness, awareness of godliness, in order for the world to continue and on its trajectory of what its purpose is. But the imagination is none of those things inherently, truth, goodness, etc. It's just the imagination. It's subjective. And so that had to take a back seat. However, there is still the essence, the kernel of what the imagination is within Klal Yisrael, within ourselves. And in fact, this is an amazing line. Hakartov hapenimi shalohu be'emes yisod kol hayofi. The spiritual essence of the imagination is the source of all beauty. And what that means, I think, is that we have this whole imagination to imagine possibilities, to combine things. That's a certain aspect of the imagination. But within the real potential of the imagination is the ability to experience things acutely and to see something transcendent in them, to sense something in them. And that itself, that's the spiritual essence of the imagination, and that is where all beauty really comes from. It's something to think about. That, of course, is revealed through prophecy. Prophecy is the ability to take something ideal, to take something conceptual that is transmitted to you and translate it into something that you can at least grasp or think about. Okay, so the imagination is then the filter for prophecy. And with all of that said, it still limits the ability to perceive of the truth of it, right? Prophecy, as we said, is an aspaklaria she'ena me'ira. Everyone except for Moshe Rabbeinu, prophecy was something that had to be passed through your own personality and your own mind. And as refined as that might be, it still limits it. It still sort of obscures it. And that's why he says the nations of the world are closer to understand a little bit of what prophecy is, but not what the Torah is. Because the Torah is about objectivity. The Torah is about ideas and concepts and transcendent realities that you can't truly understand. And when I say realities, I mean ultimately sourced in Hashem's one reality, but that idea of the Torah, of taking something so lofty and bringing it into everything in life, that's something that's unique to us. But for everyone else, this idea of experience being an expression of something higher, that's something they can relate to. The issue is that for us as a nation, we have had to be, over our history, more insular. We've had to preserve ourselves in exile. And even not in exile, right? Once there was some kind of foreign influence and people weren't doing what they're supposed to, in order to maintain the Torah, maintain our purpose, maintain our principles, we had to focus on ourselves. And we had to focus also on living in Eretz Yisrael. So as long as the world is not ready to tie everything to Seichel HaElyon, to a higher intellect, to objectivity, what has to fill that space, if we're not doing it, because we have to deal with ourselves, we have to preserve our objectivity. So the world uses, he says, a chachma tassa, a lower form of wisdom that the imagination expresses, right? There's a sort of truth which is the real truth. And then there's a truth that you can kind of experience and express and may not be the rigorous, transcendent sort of truth, but it's the truth. It's a real good way of understanding life, and that's something that people can relate to. So that is what has filled the space that was left by us not being able to use our imagination to truly fill the world with the highest truth. That was very confusing. I hope it will be clearer in the future. And what that means is that because the world is preoccupied with getting more stuff, having more control, having more pursuing rights and happiness and temporary things, and very small things, what that means is that the world is in a midas hadin. Just to explain here, midas hadin doesn't necessarily mean judging something necessarily, but it means being in a very rigid, small frame of mind. And that's what happens when the world has to function based on human experience, based on subjectivity, based on what it wants, as opposed to what it knows to be true at the end of the day. So he then refers to something in Sefer Yehoshua, where Yehoshua sends 2 spies to Eretz Yisrael in order to see what it's like before they go in. And they find a woman who's a zona, who is either a prostitute or an innkeeper, and her name is Rachav. The name Rachav relates to Harchava, relates to expansion, as an expanded consciousness, which you gain through subjective experience. So essentially the metaphor is that once we weren't in Eretz Yisrael yet, once we weren't ready for that purity, we tried to see what it was like to live an integrated life. And yet it wasn't really there yet, wasn't refined, because that rachav, that ability to be expansive, was still a zona, was still straying from a healthy, good life. Everything is tied to holiness and tied to a greater good, of course, in trying to do this integration. But there's, again, this limit. There's this need for reverence, for caution, because even though that's not the best way, ideally, to serve Hashem, in needing to be so cautious and to worry about, am I going to be punished? Or, serving Hashem on the level of, I hope I don't get punished, is a very low level. And that is necessary when life and when your experience of life, when your mind is not really refined yet, you can't just skip to the stage where you just love Hashem and do everything out of relating to it and understanding it. You have to, in our imperfect state, you have to have reverence, and you have to focus on that as your motivation. And the more the imagination is deep, and the more the imagination is in control, you need more of this sort of smallness, this sort of protection. But still, in the real national desire, that partzuf hadimyoni, that persona, that worldview that uses the imagination, was still not completed. What 2 ingredients are necessary in this integration? You have to have a true internalized knowledge and awareness, and you also have to have a sophisticated idea of what beauty is. V'zehushlam b'mei Shlomo, and that was completed in the time of Shlomo, who, by the way, built the Beis Hamikdash, which is the nexus of all of existence. It's what ties together the physical and the spiritual. Az tavona shtaim nashim zonos, two, again, zonos came before him. Lefnei mishpat melch Yisrael hayoshev al kisei Hashem. They came before Shlomo, who sat on the throne, the divinely mandated throne, and he judged them. And the idea is that if you can judge what the imagination is, if you can judge what beauty is with objectivity, a divine sort of objectivity, then you've completed it, you've refined it, right? However, because Shlomo HaMelech also married non-Jewish women, and they did Avodah Zarah, and he didn't really protest, and because, this is a great line, Gam chulshas hakoach, im chulshas hakoach la'akel devarim zarim, with the weakness to digest foreign things, Yotza harisha shagarma le'yisod krach gadol shel Romi, that's when Rome was truly established, referring to a medrash. In other words, the ability for there to be real power in the world, to use experience that way, to assert control, to do bad things, that was established through Shlomo HaMelech being influenced, and the nation being influenced by this contamination, by this weakness, to be able to integrate. And essentially, it got to the point, after all these kings and two Batei Mikdash, that they needed to get rid of the imagination, essentially, or at least the power of the imagination over the people, over the land, over how we made decisions. And what did they do? So Chazal tell us that the Anshe Knesset HaGedola decided that they need to trap and destroy the Yetzer Hara to do Avodah Zarah, to do idolatry. And proverbially or not, they captured the Yetzer Hara inside a lead pot, they shechted the Yetzer Hara. So what that means is, of course, that idolatry is the ultimate expression of using the imagination to pervert the truth. It's taking a transcendent reality and trying to limit it to physicality. That's what Avodah Zarah is, right? Because it's the opposite of what we're supposed to do. What we're supposed to do is see that everything is one. What we're supposed to do is redefine physicality up to that point, and not limit physicality and not limit the infinite and pervert our perception of the infinite into something that it's not, into something finite. And what the imagination does, because the imagination is that crossroads in the mind between the ideas and the experience, if you use it for Avodah Zarah, if you use it wrong, you're taking those ideas and making them into physicality. And that needed to stop. And as many have noted, the time that Avodah Zarah ended, or at least the desire to do Avodah Zarah ended, at that point Nevuah also ended around that time. Because Nevuah is the complete opposite. Nevuah is the ability to take the imagination and use it to express transcendence without perverting it. This is an amazing line. Rav Kook is one of the greatest lovers of Eretz Yisrael and of the Jewish people, and he says, we don't have the same sense, we don't have the same taste for that love, that deep love that we did when things were good. Because what really happens is, it's not just a matter of losing Nevuah. Losing the ability to integrate our experience of the world with ideas, with truth, that is it means that we no longer understand ourselves truly as a people, and we no longer understand our place, our physical place, correctly. Because we don't have any idea, really, of what it means to live a life where the Torah forms our culture, Torah forms our aesthetic, where the principles that we live by form how we live literally every aspect of our everyday lives. That's something that you have when you're truly connected to Eretz Yisrael. That's something that you have, because that's where we're meant to be, and that represents the ability to take a land, to take the earth, to take physical life and to transform it into something spiritual. And to love the Jewish people is something that we don't have as much of a taste for anymore. As much as we love each other and we try to love each other more and we try to be at peace with each other, we don't really understand how, because we don't see the same thing in each other as we used to. And exactly those problems are tied to the problems of the entire world. I might be inserting my own words here, but I think that if you look at the problems the world faces, that it has control over, it all basically boils down to not being aware, not introspecting about what's true and what's good, about what our feelings really are and should be, what our thoughts really should be, how we really should live. And it all ends up revolving around what I want and what I'm reacting to. And, if we lived in a world where we experienced our convictions, where we experienced truth and goodness and holiness, it would be a very different world. It would be a perfected world. But we end on a good note. Ad sheba'achris hayamim ikvos koach hamadamim eskalim. In the time before Mashiach, the footsteps of the imagination are being revealed. Fa'avas ha'aretz misoreres, and now more than ever we love Eretz Yisrael. Misra'eh hadaver b'shmarav. The ability to integrate these things, that redemption of the imagination, is appearing in small, low places, in maybe arts, maybe just small cultural things. Aval omed hu lizdakech, but it's going to be purified. And he ends with a pasuk here. So, I think what we're supposed to take away from this, besides just the fact that we don't have nevuah anymore, and therefore we have issues in the world, and that it's really hard, really hard to integrate, let's say whatever Torah Mada, Torah Derech Eretz, whatever you want to call it. It's really hard to get that right and to understand what we're actually supposed to do in terms of being a human being and these lofty ideas that the Torah has. But hopefully through our understanding of the spiritual essence of beauty, through our understanding of ourselves and what our imagination is, what it can be, and how to redefine our perspective, we can get just that much closer to that redemption that Rav Kook describes. And that much closer also to loving Eretz Yisrael, to loving the Jewish people, and to loving a life of true Avodas Hashem. Be well.